In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. Throughout Christian history, we see that there's many appearances of miracles in many different ways and forms, but we also see that on today, I wanted to bring up a particular saint who we commemorate today, and one of the miracles of a vision in the sky that he saw. And we know that throughout history, there's been many visions in the sky, and many times Christ speaking to those who were not of the Christian faith and confused or persecuting Christians. We have Saul, and as one of those examples where Christ speaks to Saul. But I wanted to read to you, this is from the end of the wedding service. So if you've been married, you've heard it, maybe. Or if you're not married, I'm just going to read you the apolysis, as we say, which is the final prayer, which when the priest says, "Glory to you, Christ our God, glory to you," and we commemorate the saints. So this says, "May Christ our true God, who by his coming to Cana rendered marriage honorable through the intercessions of his most holy pure mother, of the holy, glorious, and all-praised apostles, of the holy and God-crowned rulers equal to the apostles Constantine and Helen, of the holy great martyr Procopios, and of all the saints, may have mercy upon us and save us, for he is a good God who loves mankind." So there's three, the beginning is standard. We hear about the Virgin Mary, but then we hear about three different saints. We hear about St. Constantine, St. Helen, and St. Procopios. Well, St. Procopios we commemorate today. This is his name's day. But why those three saints? Why out of all the saints that we could have commemorated, why are those three remembered during the wedding service? And the point of understanding needs to come from the life of St. Procopios, which his name was Neanias before he became Procopios, but he was a Roman soldier, and he was on his way to persecute Christians, and he saw in the sky the vision of the cross, and he said, what is this? Who are you? And the vision to him, it was Christ who spoke to him and said, "Don't persecute the Christians." So what does he do? He takes that cross and he uses the sign of that cross on the soldiers, and he attacks those who were attacking the Christians. So he turns back on his own group, those who did not convert, and they end up attacking the Christians. He goes back to where he started in his area, and he takes his sash off. If you can't really see it in the icon of St. George. St. Demetrius here, you can kind of see they have like a breastplate, and they have the shield and a spear. That's typically the way soldiers were dressed. He takes it off and he throws it down and says, "I'm no longer a soldier, but a soldier of Christ." And he ends up becoming a martyr for the church, a great martyr for the church, and those who were with him were martyred as well. But we look at this event, which was in the late 200s, and we see that St. Paul was converted right after the time of Christ, right? So we know Paul is much earlier, and we know St. Constantine and Helen are much later, or not much later, probably about 35 years later. So we see that there's this time span with these visions. One is Saul, who becomes Paul, then we have St. Procopios, and then we have St. Constantine and Helen, where St. Constantine was the same thing happened here, but on a different level. So under Diocletian, where the emperor who persecuted St. Procopios, he split the empire in two. There was an east and a west, and they were persecuting Christians everywhere. In fact, many of the saints, martyrs that we have in the church were under that time period. It was the great persecution of the church from the Romans. But then we have this vision. He starts to turn, and many of the soldiers during that time frame were turning towards Christ and becoming martyrs of the church. That's why we have St. Demetrius, we have St. George, we have St. Minas, we have all these different saints who are soldiers who become Christians. But then we have St. Constantine and Helen, and St. Constantine was, as you know, he was a pagan at the beginning of his life. He sees, again, the hero in the sky, the It's covered. The P and the X, if you want to call it that in American terms or English terms. So the P with the X, the Hiro, which is the first two initials of the name of Christ. Christos starts with the He and the Ro. He sees this, he converts, he again places this on his shield, and he goes out and he conquers, and he reunites the empire. He actually brings the empire under sole emperorship, if you want to call it that, where he is the sole emperor of the empire. He defeats his family members, and if you read Roman history of the Roman emperors, it's very brutal. It's very brutal what was happening and how they got land and how they stayed in power and what happened to those who were deposed of power. It was a very brutal existence back then. But St. Constantine sees this vision, he changes, he makes Christianity flourish in the town that he establishes. So after we have the Roman Empire, which was in Rome, and then Constantine goes to Turkey, and he establishes the new Rome, and he calls it Constantinople. If you're going to be the sole emperor of a gigantic area, you might as well name the city after yourself, right? So that's what he does. He names the city Constantinople, which in Greek would be the city of Constantine, and he becomes the sole emperor of the area. But why in the wedding service do we hear of these three saints? In the wedding service, you recall that the crowns are placed on the heads of the couple, the man and the woman. And in the Greek tradition, it's small, it's very thin. It's usually a woven or tied with some beads or maybe sometimes a simple ring with a ribbon that connects the two. In the Russian tradition, they're actual crowns that go on the head of both, actual like crowns. So we see that tradition changes, and actually in the Russian tradition too, the celebrant in the church doesn't have to be a bishop, also wears a crown in the liturgy. So the use of full crowns are different in the Russian tradition, but it's placed on the head of the bride and the groom. And then one of the hymns that is sung as they go around the table is about the 40 martyrs of Sevastia, that we have their relics in that icon right there. Actually, Kelly, if you point straight to the wall, that's it right there. And you see that in the top of that icon, there's red little rings, and those are the crowns that descended upon the 40 martyrs. And that hymn is also sung in the middle of the wedding service, that this martyrdom, these crowns are significant to the service, significant to salvation, and significant to the sacrifice and the joining of a person with God, as well as a man and a woman in the context of marriage. So why St. Constantine, why St. Helen, why St. Procopios? Is because St. Procopios receives a crown of martyrdom in his life. And he saw the vision, he changed a drastic way of his life, as did St. Constantine. The life and the direction of life went from that of pagan, that of brutality, to that of focus and that of love towards God. So they are remembered because the actual titles of St. Constantine and Helen, who are up there, are God-crowned rulers and equal to the apostles. That is probably one of the coolest titles you can get if you're going to go for sainthood. Try and get that one. God-crowned ruler and equal to the apostles. So they were considered to be crowned by God, to be rulers, and they were considered equal to the apostles, which means they went out and they evangelized, they missionized, and their role in the church, and the early Christian church, was so critical to the flourishing of the church and the building of churches and establishment of Christianity that they're considered equal to the apostles. There's only a few other saints that are considered equal to the apostles in the history of the church. So they are God-crowned rulers. So we hear the crowning in their name, and we also see St. Procopios as one of the early Christian martyrs who also is crowned. And his martyrdom was so notable that he is in the service commemorated at the end of the marriage service, not to commemorate martyrdom per se, but sacrifice to God. And the fact that we are all called to be crowned by God through our sacrifice to him. Not all of us, well, not all of us, but I'm not sure who in the church will be physically martyred. I mean, in today's day and age here in America, that's a very rare thing that we would see. Even in some other places of the world, though, it's not so uncommon as we unfortunately see written down. But here, what's our sacrifice? You can do your cross in a restaurant. You could say a prayer wherever you'd like. You have the ability to practice our faith freely wherever you go. So where is our sacrifice? How will we become crowned with these examples? And that is the dedication to God consistently, day after day after day, to love him, to live for him, and to realize that when we see Christ the enthroned on the pulpit, you see he has a crown on his head as the high priest, the one that we are called to follow. And we are called to follow Christ in his kingdom, and in order to become citizens of his kingdom, we have to continually be faithful to the church and faithful to our faith in Christ. It's not about how much we do at one particular time. It's about a consistent path moving forward. Anyone who would exercise or even eat, we pace ourselves. We don't eat everything in the refrigerator after we go shopping. We use it throughout the week or the 2 weeks or whatever, however long we've bought food. We use it and we pace ourselves. The same thing with our lives. We need to continually pace ourselves so that we don't burn out and that we don't stall out. Those are the two problems. Overzealousness, we can burn out. Lack of drive, we stall out. And in the middle is that consistent way of life. And that's what calls us to become followers of Christ and to continually grow into his kingdom and grow into the crowns that await us to sacrifice for God. And at the end of the marriage service, it says, as the priest takes the crowns up, he says, take these crowns into your kingdom and preserve them blameless beyond reproach to the ages. In other words, the crowns that we suffer for each other, not just the crowns of marriage, but the crowns of sacrifice that we give to one another,